Okay, so now that we've got our basic guides drawn, we can go ahead and start building out our vector framework. So, or vector wireframe, however you want to call it. Now, I could just sit here and go back and forth and look at my drawing and sort of estimate, scale and stuff. But what I think is going to be a little bit easier is if I actually did a good job of, being careful with my proportions and my drawing. I mean, they don't have to be perfect, but, just sort of careful. I was extra careful for this demonstration, but I'm not always this careful. So if your drawing is, reasonably, well laid out, then you can actually import this in and use it as a template so that you don't have to sit there and guess on everything. If your sketch is really poorly done and haphazard and the proportions are nowhere near right, you may or may not find it helpful. It's still worth trying to import it just to see, and then you can kind of figure things out. So what I'm going to do is, and don't worry if your sketch, by the way, I should say, if you were able to scan your sketch, you can do this. If you didn't scan your sketch, you can't do this. And some people might say, well, I can take a picture of it with my camera phone or something like that, or my phone camera. But getting it dead center on a photograph that's taken with some sort of camera is really hard, and it might skew the perspective. I mean, you could try it, but I would recommend, if you have access to a flatbed scanner, you can scan your sketch and then you can pull it in. So what I'm going to do, I have my sketch saved in the same folder as this document right here. I went ahead and moved it into the same folder. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Photoshop first, and then I'm going to go to File, and then I'm going to say Place Linked. And what this is going to do is it's going to place it as a smart object. And this is right here, let's see, preliminary sketch. It's called prelim sketch. I'm going to place that, and it's going to allow me to move it around. It tried to sort of stick it in the center, or as best it could, I guess, but I want to sort of go ahead and arrange it so that it's in the top left corner. And I should also say, before you do this, I really recommend that you turn snap on if it's not already turned on. So make sure that your snap is enabled here and tell it to snap to guides. And anything else, I guess, if you want. All right, guides and grid too. Okay, so I registered it in that corner, but I'm not just going to hit enter because I want it to actually take up this full size. So, but I'm going to hold down Shift to constrain the proportions, and it's not there yet, so I'm just going to keep on doing it to constrain these proportions, and then it should snap right up to the edge there. And now if I lift off my mouse while I'm holding Shift down, it should be good, and then I can hit the Enter key and it places it right there in my document for me. And it does it as a smart object. So if I were to make any changes to this original document separately from this file, then it would automatically update here. And anything that I do here, like the scaling, because it's a smart object, it's not really destructively changing the resolution of the original object. It's just scaling it in this document. Okay, so as you can see, I did take a fair amount of time getting my sketch together because, it's for the demonstration. But if yours isn't quite so perfect in terms of the proportions, that's fine. You can go ahead and still sort of try to work with it and see if you can estimate, like based on where these grids are and where these columns are and stuff, you can kind of monkey things around a little bit to make them fit within the grid. A really big reason that I'm doing this, though, is to help me draw my vertical guides. And the reason I want to go ahead and have vertical guides, you don't have to have vertical guides, but the reason I want vertical guides is because it's going to make my life a lot easier when I'm drawing my vectors, because my vectors will just snap right in place and they'll be really precise, and it's perfect. Okay, so I could just start pulling my guides down. Like, let's say that I want to have a guide here, and you see as I draw it, it's like, trying to come close to where it's like on the money of some even numbered thing. Well, I could draw it like that and leave it. That's fine. But if I really care that it's on, you know, 350 and not 351, if that matters, and it very well may if you're planning on putting images of a certain size, you know, back here, then I'm going to undo what I did, and I'm going to show you a couple of tricks. One thing is that if you started to draw that down and you realize, okay, well, it's really about 350, there are two ways you could deal with this. One is you could go up to View and you could say New Guide, and you could tell it to be a horizontal guide and tell it to be at 350 pixels. And boom, it places it there for you. Perfect, right? Another option would be if you don't want to have to like sit there and do the math, because then you start having to add everything together, because this section right here that I just drew the guide for, it's actually 300, not 350 tall. It's 300, but it's taking into account the additional 50 pixels up here for the navigation. So it's going to sit there and additively go down the page. And so you'd have to do a little bit of addition and subtraction potentially. So what I'm going to show you additionally is you can go to your preferences, and I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to Photoshop preferences. On Windows, you'd go to Edit Preferences, and I'm going to go to my guides, grid, and slices. And I don't know why they still use the word slices, because we don't really use slices anymore, but let's see. Anyway, so if you go to grid, instead, this is what we had for the logo. I'm going to change my grid line so that it's like, let's say every 100 pixels, and then I'm going to have 10 subdivisions. So that's going to give me, it's going to give me a grid line basically on every 10 pixels, which is going to be really nice because then it'll give me opportunities to have my grid lines or my guidelines just snap right in place, and I don't have to worry if I'm dragging it. I don't have to worry that it's going to, you know, put it instead of at 350 at like 351. And so anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show my grid, and that starts to look really confusing. I'm sure you think. One of the things that I can do to make it a little less busy is I can go over here to my preliminary sketch and I can lower the opacity a little bit and see if that helps so that you can see your guidelines a little bit better. Maybe somewhere right in there. And what I'm going to do now is go ahead and draw some other guidelines, grid lines, and I'm going to just pull them down now, and you'll see that, it just automatically snaps in place. I don't know if you can actually see that, but it's, if you look at the numbers in this little black box that says Y650, it doesn't go to like 651 or 652. It goes from 640 to 650 because it's snapping to the grid. And so this is a really easy way now for me to draw these lines based on my drawing. And as I said before, you know, if your drawing is really sloppy, then you're going to kind of have to sort of rearrange or guesstimate and, you know, figure that part out. I could go ahead if I wanted to. I could put, you know, grids for the typography, but I'm not going to. I think, well, I guess I could, you know, it's fine. I can put it like at the baseline of the type so that I'll know where to place the baseline. But the thing is, if I have too many grids, it might get confusing for me. So, or too many guides, so I'm going to undo that. I'm going to just do my typography separately. And right now I'm just going to draw the really important major components. So like my sections, so that one's at like 1230 pixels. And then I'm also going to draw for my little thumbnails, I'm going to draw the tops and bottoms of those because it'll make it a lot easier when I'm snapping my information there. Okay, so anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and draw all of these guides out. And this way I know that it'll be on an even number, which, you know, is not the most important thing in the world, but I think it's going to be pretty helpful. So there we go. And finally, we have this bottom. And, you know, we can basically, if this is what we're going to base everything off of, we could go ahead and crop our image, and that would be just fine. You know, but if you decide that you maybe want to add other stuff, let's just leave it long for right now, and we can always go back and crop it later. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save what I've got so far. And now what I can do, I'm going to turn my preliminary sketch down even lower in opacity. So it's and then I can actually, now I can turn my grid off, because the grid is what's making everything really confusing. I just had the grid on so as to show you kind of, you know, where everything was mapping out to be. Oh, and the other thing too is, you know, we've got this badge, so I could draw a grid line here for the bottom of that badge, and oh, see, it's not snapping anymore now that I'm not showing the grid. Let me undo that. Let me turn that grid back on real quick. And let's have it snap. There we go. So it's about 510 pixels or something like that. 500, somewhere in there. Okay, we'll just make it 510, and it'll be something like that. Okay, and now I can turn my grid back off. Anytime you want to draw more of those guidelines and just have them snap in place, then just remember that you can always, you know, you can always turn that grid back on. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to start drawing out our sections. But before we do that, let's be really organized about how we, you know, do this project. And I'm going to suggest that you start doing layer groups, because you're going to have a bunch of stuff on here. And without having the different objects and items in groups, it's going to be really confusing to look at this document later. So what I'm going to suggest is that you go ahead and make your group folders now. So I'm going to go ahead down to my layers panel, and if you want to drag this out so that it's even more prominent, and we'll make it maybe so it's not quite so long, but down at the bottom you'll see a folder. So I'm going to make something called Group 1, and before I start to name all of this stuff, let me just show you kind of where we're going with this. Okay, if we jump back over here to my notes that we were looking at before, you know, the last thing that we talked about in this note thing was about creating these margins. But then there's this other section about setting up guides. We've already done that, okay? And we just set our grid and we're drawing our vertical lines. We've already done that. So now we're at a place where we're setting up the vector wireframe elements. So we're going to create our layer groups based on the web page sections. And if you look at that drawing, let's just jump back here. What we have is we've got like this whole header area, okay? And the header area, it's got the navigation, it's got that logo badge, it has this banner, which is going to be an image, it's not just flat color. So that can be like the whole banner header area. Okay, so we could call that like header. Let's call that header. Okay, and so we'll put our header elements in there, and then we're going to make another group, and that's going to be this part where it says, you know, we are interior designers. So let's just call that who we are, because that's what the link up here says. So let's say who we are. Okay, so all of these elements in this big white chunk, right, that's the who we are section, and it's going to have our galleries and some blurb here. So, all right, and then the next one is going to be where it says our team, so we'll call that our team. All right. And then the next section is the contact section, so we'll call that contact us. And the next section is this little navigation bar at the bottom that's got social media links. So we're going to create something here called social media bar. Okay. And then lastly, we have the footer. So we're going to create something now called the footer. So that's going to be the footer group. Okay, so now at least we have these sections made, and we're going to try to be really diligent to work within them properly. And you know, sometimes I screw up or you'll screw up, and you're going to have to move things around. But now one thing I want to go ahead and note really quickly is if you scroll up here and you look at this header area, this logo badge, it's going to have to sort of like jut down on top of the section that's the who we are section. So really what I want to do is I want to put the header on top of who we are so that it'll show up on top of this section. All right, we can go ahead and just visualize how that's going to work, and we'll just fix it right now so that we don't have to do it later. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude this is sort of like the part 1 of setting up the wireframe with vectors. Even though we didn't draw the vectors yet, now we're ready to go ahead and do that. We've got our structure in place. So go ahead and move on to the part 2 of setting up the wireframe in the next video.